Hey everybody, welcome to my channel. If you are new here, my name is CrysDawna and I am a furniture artist. If you're not subscribed, hit the subscribe button and then hit the bell and you'll get all the latest videos. Everything I always use will be in the description below. Today I'm going to be making over this big China hutch cabinet, whatever. It's actually, you can't even see some of it. Here, let's show you how big it is. There we go. Okay, so it's pretty tall. But I'm gonna go back to basics and I'm gonna show you guys, if you are a beginner, how to paint a piece of furniture with Dixie Belle's chalk mineral paint. We're also going to be, and I have the roll, we're gonna be using, they have brand new transfers coming out. They will be available online at the very beginning of April. So we're gonna be using this. I'm gonna be making this over only using 3 products. The transfer, okay, well I lied. We'll be using the transfer, we'll be using the paint. We're gonna be doing a different color back here and put the transfer over it, and then we'll be sealing it. So 4 products. Not counting, you know, the paintbrushes and whatever, but so I'm gonna show you guys how easy it can be if you're a beginner. Even if you're not a beginner, it's always good to go back and just kind of refresh yourself with different things that you can do. So if you guys wanna see how I do this, stay tuned because we're gonna get started.
The first thing I do when I'm making over furniture is I remove all the hardware. This hardware actually has little dowels in it, so I had to unscrew it and knock it loose so that I could pull it out. And then you'll see later on, I fill it with wood filler and the dowel because I want to put knobs and that hole was a little too big. I also take all the doors off, remove all the hinges. I pretty much disassemble the entire piece before I start prepping and painting. When I disassemble a piece and I pull all the hinges off, I number them so that I know exactly where the hinges go back. This is a newer piece, so it won't matter as much, but for those older, more vintage antique pieces, you'd be surprised at how the drawers and the hinges and the doors like to go back to where they came from. So I always number the doors and the drawers and the hinges so that way you can put them right back where they came from. Now that my piece is completely disassembled, I am going to start my prepping process. The very first thing you're going to do after you're done pulling your piece apart and disassembling everything is cleaning it. You never ever want to skip this step. So I'm using Dixie Belle's White Lightning and some warm water with a microfiber cloth, and I'm going to clean the entire piece. And then after I'm done cleaning it, I'm going to go over it with clean water and a clean rag. You don't want to skip that either, because if you keep the soap on there and there's residue, then you could have adhesion issues. So even if a piece does not look super dirty, it can be dirty, and this one surprised me. You see how dirty the water is? I did not think it was that dirty. While this piece is drying, I'm going to show you how I filled those bigger holes on the doors and the drawers. So I'm taking the knobs that had those dowels sticking out. I'm going to take a handsaw. First, I'm going to clamp these down, and then I'm going to take a handsaw and I'm going to cut that dowel off because I want to reuse it. I like to reuse things. And so if you don't have one like this, you can take a dowel that fits just snugly in those holes, but I'm just going to reuse this part by cutting them off. There's going to be tape on the back, and then I'm going to fill it with wood glue, and that tape on the back keeps the wood glue from seeping through. And then I'm going to fill it with my Titebond wood glue, and then I'm going to put that dowel in there so it fits nice and snug. And that way I'm not filling that entire hole with a wood filler or something like that. Now I'm going to fill the area with my Dixie Mud by Dixie Belle, and this is going to just smooth everything out. So I'm going to put a thin layer on there first, and then I'm going to allow it to dry, and I'll sand it, and I'll probably put another layer on it just to really make sure it's all smooth. Now I am going to sand down and strip down the top of this piece, and I'm going to use my Bosch sander. I haven't used this in a while. I normally use my Surf Prep, but I wanted to use an entry-level sander so that way I could show beginners what they can use. So I start with a 60 grit sandpaper, and I want you to take note of how slow I'm going. You really need to make sure that you're controlling your orbital sander, otherwise you're going to get a lot of swirls and craziness. So maintain control of it and start with a 60 grit, then I go up to an 80 grit, and then I go up to a 120 grit. If you see a little area like this when you are stripping down your top, that means that pre-existing finish is still on there and your stain will not take. So make sure that you have all the old finish off before you stain. I am going to just hand sand the sides as well because the orbital sander will just eat through the sides. So I'm just going to maintain the control with manually sanding it. Again, I'm going to do my 60, 80, and then 120 grit. So right now I'm showing you I'm going over it with my 80 grit. This helps smooth out your surface, and it helps you just make sure you get all that old finish off, and it will smooth it out to where it's not so rough. So do not, even if you sand down and you have all the existing finish off with your 60, even your 80 grit, do not leave it. You need to smooth it out with at least a 120. Otherwise, your surface is going to be rough and it's not going to feel nice. And it also isn't going to take the stain evenly. This entire piece was made with a soft wood like pine, and so I want to use a wood conditioner. I'm using Big Mama's Butter, which is an oil-based conditioner that will condition the wood before I use my no pain gel stain, which is also oil-based. You do not want to do this if you're going to be using a water-based stain, but because I'm using an oil-based stain, I am using this oil-based conditioner to condition my wood so that way my stain goes on more evenly. This is really important for softer woods, for woods like pine, things like that, so that you get a nice even stain on your finish. You're going to wipe all the excess off and let it sit for about an hour before you go over it with your stain. I'm going to be using Dixie Belle's No Pain Gel Stain in the color Walnut. I do stir this before I use it because it's thick and I want to make sure that I have it nice and stirred. So I'm going to use an applicator pad and I'm going to put my first coat on here, and I'm going to do circles and long even strokes. I just want to make sure I get it in there and I saturate the wood with it first. And I'm going to do another layer of this, but what I do is I actually wait a few hours for it to dry, and then I'll do my second coat on there, and then I'll leave it and I allow it to dry for 72 hours before I put a top coat on here. So you'll be able to see that at the very end I do one final wipe across, and that way I know that it's even. Now I'm going to go back to my drawer front and I'm going to sand off with a 120 grit the Dixie mud that was on there, and I'm going to do my second layer, which will be my final layer, and that will just allow me to have a nice smooth finish. because sometimes your hardware holes will still be visible after the first time that you fill them. So you have to go through with another thin layer. That way you have a nice smooth surface that doesn't show any of your pre-existing holes. So I'm going to do this on all of my stuff, on all my doors and my drawers, and I'm going to allow those to dry, and I'll go back and I will sand those down, and that way it'll be ready for paint. I've brought the bottom of the hutch inside, but I'm going to be doing some sanding, and I want to make sure that I don't get any dust on the top. It's not completely dried, and when I say that, I mean it's not dry enough for a water-based top coat. So I allow it to sit for 72 hours after I put my final coat on, and that way it's fully dry, because you can put a water-based top coat over an oil-based stain, but it has to be thoroughly dried. So my rule of thumb is 72 hours. So I'm going to cover this with plastic because I don't want any dust to get on there. I'm going to use a fine sanding pad, which is the equivalent of a 220 to 240 grit, and I'm going to sand that mud now that it's dry, and I'm also going to scuff sand my entire piece. So I'm just going to kill two birds with one stone. The reason why I'm scuff sanding this is because there's a really shiny finish on it. If there wasn't, I wouldn't scuff sand it because cleaning it is good enough. But when you're first starting, doing more prep is better, and it also depends on the paint you're using. So for Dixie Belle, if you have a shiny surface like this one was, then it is recommended that you scuff sand just so you get the best adhesion possible. Just remember that your final product is only as good as your prep work. So I'm going to scuff sand this entire piece down, and I'm doing the doors and all the other stuff. So it's really important for you to clean first so that you get all of your dirt and oil and things out. Then you can do your scuff sand, and then you can wipe down with a damp rag. You don't want to sand before you clean because you don't want to sand all those dirt and oils into your surface. So make sure you always clean, sand, and then wipe down with a damp rag to get all of the dust off. Now we are ready for paint, and I am going to use Vintage Duck Egg by Dixie Belle. It's a really pretty calm, it's kind of like a pop of color, but it's a calmer, more neutral color, and I am going to paint the frame of this piece first. So I'm going to paint the inside of where the drawers go, and on the inside frame where all the doors open, and that way I get a more professional look. So I want you to know that one of the things that I'm showing you, the disassembling the whole piece and taking the hinges off, things like that, that's so that you can get the most professional finish possible. There are a lot of people who don't do that, and that's totally fine. It's up to you. But this is how I would recommend if you're first starting painting, especially if you're going to be painting other people's stuff. You want to do it the most professional way possible. So right now what I'm doing is I'm going to put a piece of tape underneath the lip. You want to make sure you keep the underneath of that lip clean as well. You don't want to have random paint underneath there. I know it sounds crazy, but sometimes you can see it and it's just not professional. So I put tape down, and I'm also using an angled brush, and you can see I take some of the excess and I take it off, and then I let that angled brush kind of glide across the surface so that I butt it up against where that tape is, and I'm going to have a nice crisp line. But anytime that I have excess paint on my brush, I wipe it off underneath, so that way I don't get extra paint underneath that tape. And so this is going to allow me to get a nice, clean, professional finish as well, doing it this way. I wanted to show you a few things to be conscious of when you're painting, and so I want you to watch me painting here for a second. Sometimes when we paint, we don't pay attention and we get that glob of paint on the other side in the front, and so we're going to focus right here. Make sure that you smooth that out, because if that dries, it's going to be a glob of paint that's not going to look good, and then you're going to have to sand it down. And so when you're painting, just make sure that you're checking for any areas that pull up or that get on the front of the piece if you're painting the side of the piece, to smooth that out. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm going to show you how I get a smooth finish. I'm going to do long, even strokes going in one direction, and I'm going to cover the side of the entire piece by doing that. I'm going to go the opposite direction so that way I can get full coverage with that paint and grab any areas that I missed. And then I'm going to go back down with a light hand in the original direction that I painted. And this will give you a really nice smooth finish by doing that. While you're waiting for your first coat to dry, grab a Ziploc bag and put your paintbrush in there. And then when you're ready for your second coat, you can pull it back out. Now I'm going to paint the drawer front, and I want to show you two different ways you can paint drawer fronts. You can pull one out if you would like, because I've seen people ask the question of why do people paint with the drawer fronts in the piece? It's just personal preference. So you can absolutely paint it when it's out, and you can get at all the different angles if you do it that way. Or I'll show you next how you can paint the drawers with them being in the piece. Make sure that you take some tape and you tape right at that drawer side that is right behind the drawer face. And that will help you. If you do get some paint on there, I'm going to show you how to clean it up later, but this will help you keep clean lines as well. So the drawer front is in the piece right now, and I'm going to paint with it in. Now you're probably going to have to get down lower to get underneath the drawer like I am right here. So if that's not comfortable for you, then pull the drawers out and paint them with them out. It doesn't matter if you paint them with them in or with them out. Like I said, it's personal preference. It's just what you prefer. It depends on the piece for me, really. It depends on if I'm blending or if I'm doing a solid color, but these are two different ways that you could try it. I like to wait about an hour after my paint is fully dry to go in with my second coat, and I usually do a thinner layer because the coverage of Dixie Belle paint is so good that it's almost like a skim coat to get anything that I've missed. So right here I'm just doing my second layer on my drawer front, and then I'm going to be done. I don't need any more than that. You don't need more paint if you've already got full coverage. So I'm going to allow this to completely dry, and then I'll be happy. I'm going to pull all the tape off that I put so that I can get crisp lines. So on the drawers and everywhere else, I am going to show you what you can do if you do get paint on your drawers. Take your sandpaper and you're going to take it off. Do not leave that there. Again, it looks sloppy. So make sure that you're cleaning up your drawers or anywhere that you got paint that it doesn't belong. Make sure you sand it, and then you can take a microfiber cloth and wipe it up to get the sand residue or the sand cast off. But right here, this is where the cabinet doors go, and I'm still going to clean up that line. So you can take your sandpaper and you can just make those lines nice and clean and wipe them up with the microfiber cloth. I'm going to show you right here how I distress. I'm just taking some 120 grit sandpaper and I'm lightly going over different areas to where it would naturally distress. I'm not getting crazy with this. I'm just doing some light distressing. Before I apply a top coat, I really like to smooth out my finish, so I'm using a super fine rad pad, which is the equivalent to a 500 to 600 grit sandpaper. You don't have to do this, but I like doing it because I really like to feel the smoothness of the surface after I have taken this fine of a sandpaper to it. It feels really, really nice. So I do this, and then I'm going to wipe all the dust off with a microfiber cloth, and then I'm going to seal this entire piece with Dixie Belle's Gator Hide. So I'm going to mix my Gator Hide with a tongue depressor first so that I can get anything that's on the bottom thoroughly mixed, and then I'm going to pour it into a cup to where I'll be able to dip my brush into it. So I'm going to mix it all really well. I'm going to pour it into a different cup, and then I'm going to use a high quality synthetic brush to put my Gator Hide on my piece. When I apply my gator hide with a synthetic brush, I use a dry brush and I dip it in to the gator hide and I get as much of the excess off as I can. And I just, with a light hand, do long strokes and I try not to overwork it. Once it starts drying, you don't want to mess with it. And then I'll go to the next row and I'll lightly overlap the other area and I'll do the same exact thing. But I'm using a light hand this entire time. So you're going to apply this on your entire piece. It's been 72 hours since I put my last coat of stain, and I can tell it's dry because my hands do not come back with stain on them and they don't get stuck. So you want to make sure it's thoroughly dried. I also am going to show you my roller. So I'm going to use a roller for this. It's a high density foam roller and I'll put it in the description below. You can get it at any hardware store or Amazon. I'm pouring my mixed gator hide on there. I'm going to cover my sponge and then I'm going to get all the excess off and I'm going to do the same exact thing. I'm going to work in lines and I'm going to try to do one continuous roll at the very end. So I start a little bit further back from the edge so that way I don't get a buildup on the edge, and I do one continuous roll at the very end to smooth everything out. I'm going to do a couple coats of this, but you can see I'm going to do that. Okay, now I'm going to come all the way back with one continuous roll. I'm going to smooth out that excess that was on the side that you could see it pulled up a little bit, and I'm going to put a little bit more back on my roller, and then I'm going to repeat the process. After this is dried, I wait about an hour after it's dried and I take my very fine sandpaper and I scuff it and then I wipe it down with a damp rag, wait for that to dry, and then I'm going to put one more layer of my gator hide on top. And what that does is it evens it out and makes it look really, really nice, and this is a really durable finish. But I'm going to show you the roller here in a few minutes, and you want your roller to come back with no brown or no stain on it. If your roller comes back and there is stain that has transferred onto it, that means that it was not dried long enough. So you need to make sure that you allow your oil-based stain to dry very good before you put a water-based sealer on top of it. Okay, so this next part is just to show you how I did this. Now, I'm going to pull apart the back of this hutch, but it's in like 4 different pieces. So I wanted to make sure that I labeled them so I knew where they went. I'm taking my mini pry bar and I'm going to carefully pull out the nails. You can see that I'm using my hammer to pull it down, and then I'm going to push on that plywood, and then I'm going to take my needle nose pliers and pull out the nail that was sticking out. I am going to take the back of this piece, which is just plywood, and I'm going to paint it all in Dixie Belle's drop cloth. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I want a nice white base for my brand new lace transfer by Dixie Belle to go over top, and so that way it looks a lot nicer. So now that I've done that, I did 2 layers and I waited for it to dry for 24 hours before I put it over my paint. I just wanted to make sure it was thoroughly dried before I put a transfer down. So you're going to pull the transfer from the protective backing, and you're going to make sure that it's right where you want it. So I'm going to put it on the back of that board or the plywood. That this is the backing to the hutch, and I'm going to make sure I place it where I want, and I'm going to burnish it, which is burnishing means you're pushing it down. So I'm pushing it down with my hands first to get it in place, and then I'm going to take this stick, which is a burnishing stick, and I am going to burnish this down. So what I'm doing here is what we call burnishing, or transferring the transfer over, and you want to make sure that you rub this really hard with the stick, and then you can pull that plastic off, and it's going to transfer that design over to the wood part. So you want to just burnish, 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 and then you'll be able to transfer that, it's called a transfer, over onto your piece that is going to become the backing to that hutch. Once you have transferred your entire design over, you're going to want to take a microfiber cloth and you're going to want to burnish it down even more. I like to do this. You can never burnish too much. I know you're going to get tired of hearing me say burnish, but this allows this transfer to be adhered to that surface 100,000,000% before you put a sealer on it. So even if you're using a paint that doesn't require a sealer, you always have to seal transfers. And so I'm using Dixie Belle's satin clear coat, and I'm going to seal this transfer, and you'll see right here I just take a foam brush and I just go over each individual part, and then it is nice and sealed, so I don't have to worry about it lifting up or getting scratched or anything like that. Doesn't this look super, super cute? So there is a bottom part to that hutch, and I ended up painting it in driftwood by Dixie Belle, so it's a light gray. But now I'm going to show you how I did the hardware. So you see that there's a pre-existing hole there. I'm going to carefully take my drill bit, and I'm going to gently and slowly drill through that pre-existing hole that was already there, and you'll see it from the back. This is how it's going to come out through the front. You want to do it gently, and you want to, so you don't want to punch that dowel back out. It shouldn't, because you have wood glue and filler and stuff like that. But I wanted to put a knob, but that hole from that pre-existing hardware was bigger than these new knobs. So I had to clean it up and make it nicer. So now I'm putting these new knobs on here, and it looks perfect. It looks so, so good. So that is how I'm putting the hardware on.
Okay, everybody, so I am done. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope as a beginner, this was really helpful for you. Also, if you're not a beginner, maybe you learned a few things. So this piece is done. I am going to do a little video so you can see the whole thing, and then I'm gonna have some staged pictures, so make sure you stay tuned. After all my videos, I always have nice staged pictures, so if you're ever wondering what it looks like, stay on and you can see them. So if you are not subscribed, please make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit the bell, you'll get all the latest that I put out. Everything I use will be in the description below, so you can start your own project. Until then, happy creating, everybody. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
simplest feeling beyond the ghost. We stand on the opposite shore. Hello, Ramona. I reach through mysterious ceilings, my only hope. I look for the things I don't